Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez adjusted her rifle scope as the desert sun beat down mercilessly on the rocky outcrop. 300 meters below, her 6-man SEAL team moved through the narrow canyon like shadows. Their mission clear, but dangerous. They were hunting a high-value target in the mountains of Afghanistan, a Taliban commander who had been planning attacks on American bases. Maria had been with the team for 8 months now, the first female sniper officially assigned to a SEAL unit. The men had been skeptical at first, but her deadly accuracy and cool nerves under pressure had earned their respect. She could hit a target at 800 meters in complete darkness, and her kill count was already legendary among Special Operations Forces. The team below consisted of Lieutenant Commander Jake Sullivan, the team leader with 15 years of experience. Next to him moved Petty Officer First Class Tommy Chen, the communications specialist whose quick thinking had saved them more times than anyone could count. Behind them, Hospital Corpsman Second Class Marcus Williams carried the medical supplies, his steady hands having patched up countless wounds in the field. The demolitions expert, Chief Petty Officer Rick Santos, moved with practiced silence despite carrying enough explosives to level a small building. Bringing up the rear were Petty Officer Second Class David Kim, the tech specialist, and Petty Officer First Class Alex Turner, whose knowledge of local languages had proven invaluable. Maria watched through her scope as they approached the target building, a mud brick compound nestled between towering cliffs. Intelligence suggested the Taliban commander was hiding there with a small group of fighters. What intelligence hadn't mentioned was the carefully planned trap waiting for them. The first sign of trouble came when Maria noticed movement on the ridge opposite her position. Through her scope, she counted at least 15 fighters taking positions among the rocks. Her heart rate remained steady as she immediately switched to her radio. Overwatch to Alpha Team, you've got company on the North Ridge, multiple hostiles in fighting positions. Sullivan's voice crackled back through her earpiece. Copy that, Overwatch. How many are we talking about? At least 15, possibly more. They're well concealed and appear to be waiting for you to enter the kill zone. The team immediately took cover behind a cluster of boulders, their training kicking in automatically. But Maria's sharp eyes continued scanning the surrounding terrain, and what she saw made her blood run cold. More movement on the south ridge than the east. The enemy had positioned fighters on 3 sides of the canyon, creating a deadly crossfire zone. Alpha Team, this is worse than we thought. You've got hostiles on 3 ridges. I'm counting at least 30 fighters, and they're all in position to cut off your escape routes. Work 70, RPS. The silence on the radio lasted only a few seconds, but Maria could imagine the team's minds racing through their options. They were outnumbered 5-1, trapped in a narrow canyon with limited cover and no easy way out. Sullivan's voice came back calm but tense. Overwatch, can you give us a path out? Maria studied the terrain through her scope, noting every rock formation, every potential firing position, every possible escape route. The canyon had only 2 exits, the way they had come in, which was now blocked by fighters on the ridges, and a narrow passage at the far end that led deeper into enemy territory. Negative on clean exit routes, Alpha Team. The enemy has you boxed in pretty tight, but I might be able to thin their numbers if you can stay low and give me some time. How much time do you need? Maria calculated distances, wind speed, and the positions of the enemy fighters. Her rifle was a custom-built 338 Lapua Magnum, capable of reaching out beyond 1,000 meters with devastating accuracy. The problem wasn't the distance, it was the sheer number of targets and their spread across multiple ridges. Give me 10 minutes and keep your heads down. I'm going to start picking them off, but once I open fire, they'll know exactly where you are. Understood, Overwatch. We'll be ready. Maria took a deep breath and settled into her shooting position. She had been in situations like this before, but never with odds quite this bad. 30 enemy fighters against 6 SEALs and 1 sniper. The mathematics weren't encouraging, but mathematics had never been her strong suit anyway. Marksmanship was. She selected her first target, a fighter positioned on the North Ridge who appeared to be the leader of that group. He was pointing and gesturing to the others, clearly coordinating their ambush. Maria adjusted for wind and elevation, controlled her breathing, and slowly squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report echoed across the canyon like thunder. 800 meters away, the enemy leader crumpled and fell from his rocky perch. The other fighters immediately began looking around in confusion, unsure where the shot had come from. Maria was already acquiring her next target before the first body hit the ground. A machine gunner on the south ridge had set up a position that would have devastated the SEAL team once they moved into the open. She put a round through his chest before he even knew he was being hunted. The enemy fighters were starting to panic now, realizing they were being picked off by an unseen shooter. Some began firing wildly in all directions, their muzzle flashes giving Maria even more targets to work with. She methodically worked her way across the ridges, each shot carefully planned and executed. A sniper on the east ridge had found cover behind a large boulder and was trying to locate Maria's position. She put a round through the small gap between the rocks, silencing him permanently. An RPG team was setting up to fire into the canyon where the SEALs were hiding. Maria's next shot took out the gunner just as he was shouldering the rocket launcher. But for every fighter she eliminated, it seemed like two more appeared. The enemy had clearly been planning this ambush for some time, and they had brought more men than intelligence had suggested. Maria's ammunition supply was beginning to concern her. She had started with 40 rounds, and she was already down to 32. Alpha Team, I've dropped 8 tangos, but more keep showing up. How are you holding down there? We're good for now, but they're starting to close in. Keep up the good work, Overwatch. Maria continued her deadly work, each shot precisely placed and devastatingly effective. A fighter trying to flank the SEAL position fell with a round through his torso. Another attempting to set up a mortar was silenced before he could drop the first shell down the tube. The enemy was becoming more cautious now, keeping better cover and moving less predictably. But Maria had been trained to hunt the most dangerous game on Earth, and these fighters were making mistakes born of fear and desperation. She could read their movements, anticipate their next positions, and deliver death from distances they couldn't even imagine. 24 rounds remaining, 12 enemy fighters down, but at least 18 more were still out there, and they were getting smarter about using cover. The real test was just beginning. Maria adjusted her position slightly, using the natural camouflage of the rocky outcrop to remain invisible to the searching eyes below. The sun was starting to lower in the sky, which would soon give her additional advantages as shadows began to fall across the canyon. She selected her 13th target, a communications specialist who was trying to call for reinforcements. The shot was nearly 900 meters, at the very edge of her effective range. But Maria had made longer shots under worse conditions. The fighter dropped his radio and fell backward off the ridge. Overwatch to Alpha Team, that's 13 down. I count approximately 17 still active, but they're getting harder to spot. Copy that. We're seeing movement on all 3 ridges, and it looks like they're trying to coordinate a rush on our position. Can you disrupt their timing? Maria smiled grimly. Disrupting enemy timing was exactly what she did best. She began targeting fighters who appeared to be in leadership positions, the ones giving orders and trying to organize the attack. Her 14th shot took down what appeared to be a squad leader on the north ridge. The 15th eliminated a fighter who was clearly coordinating movements with hand signals. The enemy fighters were becoming increasingly frustrated and desperate. They knew they were being systematically hunted, but they couldn't locate their tormentor. Some began firing randomly toward the surrounding hills, hoping to suppress the sniper they couldn't see. Maria used their muzzle flashes to locate additional targets. 16 down. 17. 18. Her ammunition supply was getting critically low, but she was making every shot count. The enemy force was being reduced from a coordinated fighting unit to a collection of scared men who were beginning to question whether this ambush had been worth the cost. But the fight was far from over. The remaining fighters were the smartest and most disciplined ones, the survivors who had learned to use cover effectively and move with purpose. They would be much harder to eliminate, and Maria was running out of time and ammunition. As the sun continued its descent toward the horizon, the real battle was just beginning. 20 rounds left in her magazine, and Maria could see that the remaining enemy fighters had learned from watching their comrades die. They were no longer making careless movements or exposing themselves unnecessarily. The ones who survived her initial assault were the veterans, the ones who understood how to fight against a skilled sniper. The Taliban fighters had also figured out roughly where her shots were coming from. Even if they couldn't pinpoint her exact location, several of them had positioned themselves behind solid rock cover and were taking turns firing suppressive rounds toward her general area. The bullets weren't coming close enough to be dangerous, but they were forcing her to keep her head down more than she liked. Alpha Team, the remaining tangos are getting smart. They're using proper counter-sniper tactics and coordinating their movements better. I need you to help me flush them out. Lieutenant Commander Sullivan's voice came back immediately. What do you need us to do, Overwatch? I need someone to make some noise on the south side of your position. Draw their attention for about 30 seconds. That should give me the opening I need to take out the machine gun nest that's been giving me trouble. Turner, you're up. Give Overwatch some fireworks. Petty Officer Turner had been waiting for this moment. He pulled the pin on a fragmentation grenade and hurled it toward a cluster of rocks on the south ridge. The explosion echoed through the canyon, followed immediately by the sharp crack of his M4 carbine as he laid down covering fire. The distraction worked perfectly. 3 fighters on the south ridge exposed themselves as they turned to engage Turner's position. Maria's rifle spoke 3 times in quick succession. 3 bodies tumbled down the rocky slope. 17 rounds remaining. But the enemy adapted quickly. Within minutes, they had established a new pattern of movement that kept them in cover while still maintaining their positions. Maria realized she was dealing with experienced fighters who had probably survived previous encounters with American Special Operations Forces. The situation became even more complicated when Maria spotted movement in the distance beyond the canyon. Through her scope, she could see dust clouds that suggested vehicles approaching. Reinforcements were coming, and they would arrive within the next 20 minutes. Alpha Team, we've got a new problem. I've got vehicles approaching from the northeast, approximately 2 kilometers out. Looks like at least 3 trucks, probably carrying another 20 to 30 fighters. The silence on the radio lasted several seconds. Sullivan was calculating their options, and none of them were good. They couldn't stay in the canyon and fight a force of 50 to 60 enemies. But they also couldn't escape while the current group of fighters held the high ground. Overwatch, how many of the original group are still active? Maria did a careful count, scanning each ridge methodically. I count 12 confirmed active, possibly 2 or 3 more in positions I can't see clearly. But these are the smart ones. Jake, they're not making mistakes. Understood. We need to move before those reinforcements arrive, but we can't move with hostiles on the ridges. Can you clear us a path? Maria studied the terrain carefully. The enemy fighters were positioned to cover all the obvious escape routes, but there was one narrow passage on the west side of the canyon that seemed less heavily defended. If she could eliminate the 3 fighters covering that route, the SEAL team might be able to slip out. I think I can clear the west passage, but it's going to require some precision shooting. I need you to create a distraction on the north ridge while I reposition. We can do that. Give us 2 minutes to get ready. Maria immediately began moving to a new shooting position about 50 meters from her current location. The enemy fighters had been zeroing in on her previous spot, and she needed a different angle to engage the targets covering the west passage. The new position offered a better view of the western route, but put her dangerously close to several enemy positions. She would be shooting at much shorter ranges, which meant her shots would be easier, but also meant the enemy would be able to spot her muzzle flash more easily. Alpha Team in position. Light them up. The SEAL team opened fire with everything they had. M4 carbines, a squad automatic weapon, and several grenades created a massive volume of fire directed at the north ridge. The enemy fighters immediately responded, focusing their attention on the incoming fire. Maria used the chaos to her advantage. The first fighter covering the west passage was only 400 meters away. An easy shot even under pressure. He dropped without ever knowing he was in danger. The second fighter was partially concealed behind a rock formation, but Maria could see enough of his torso to place an accurate shot. 15 rounds remaining. The third fighter was the problem. He was positioned in a natural cave in the cliff face, with only the barrel of his rifle visible. Maria would need to wait for him to expose more of himself, but time was running short. The vehicle-borne reinforcements were getting closer, and the distraction wouldn't last much longer. She settled in to wait, controlling her breathing and keeping the crosshairs steady on the cave entrance. Patience was as important as accuracy in her line of work. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 seconds, the fighter shifted position to get a better angle on the seals below. It was the opening Maria had been waiting for. She could see his shoulder and part of his head through the scope. The shot was at an upward angle through a narrow gap in the rocks. But it was doable. She squeezed the trigger smoothly, and the fighter disappeared back into the cave. This time permanently. Alpha Team, West Passage is clear. Move now. The SEALs didn't need to be told twice. They moved out of their defensive positions with the fluid efficiency of men who had trained together for years. Sullivan led the way, with Chen right behind him carrying the radio. Williams and Santos covered the rear while Kim and Turner watched the flanks, but the enemy wasn't going to let them escape without a fight. The remaining fighters on the other ridges immediately began shifting their positions to maintain contact with the fleeing Americans. Maria could see at least 8 fighters moving rapidly along the ridge lines, trying to get ahead of the SEAL team. Alpha Team, you've got hostiles trying to cut you off at the mouth of the West Passage. I'm engaging now. Maria's rifle began speaking again, each shot carefully aimed at fighters who were trying to establish new blocking positions. A Taliban fighter sprinting along the north ridge fell after taking a round through the chest. Another fighter attempting to set up behind a rock outcrop was silenced before he could take aim. But Maria was running low on ammunition, and the enemy seemed to have an endless supply of fighters. For every one she eliminated, another appeared to take his place. The approaching vehicles were now close enough that she could hear their engines echoing off the canyon walls. 11 rounds left. The SEAL team was moving as fast as they could through the rocky terrain, but they were still exposed to fire from multiple directions. Maria continued providing overwatch, picking off fighters who got too close or tried to establish blocking positions. A sniper on the East Ridge had found a new position and was tracking the moving SEALs through his scope. Maria spotted him just as he was taking aim at Sullivan. Her shot reached him before he could fire, but the round had to travel nearly 1,000 meters through swirling wind. It was one of the most difficult shots she had made all day, but it was also one of the most important. 10 rounds remaining, and the vehicles were now visible through her scope. 3 pickup trucks loaded with fighters were bouncing across the desert floor. Heading directly for the canyon, they would arrive in less than 10 minutes. Alpha Team, pickup trucks approximately 8 minutes out. You need to pick up the pace. We're moving as fast as we can, Overwatch. The terrain is slowing us down. Maria could see the problem. The West Passage was narrow and filled with loose rocks that made rapid movement dangerous. One twisted ankle could doom the entire team. But they were running out of time and options. She made a decision that would change the entire dynamic of the fight. Instead of continuing to provide overwatch for the escaping team, she began targeting the approaching vehicles. The lead truck was still over a kilometer away, at the very edge of her rifle's effective range. But Maria had made longer shots before, and the truck was a much larger target than a human being. She adjusted for the extreme range and the movement of the vehicle, took a deep breath, and squeezed the trigger. The round struck the truck's engine block, sending steam and smoke billowing from under the hood. The vehicle immediately began losing speed and pulled to one side. The other 2 trucks had to slow down to avoid colliding with the disabled vehicle. 9 rounds left, and Maria had just bought the SEAL team precious additional minutes. But she had also revealed her position to every enemy fighter in the area. Return fire immediately began impacting the rocks around her position, forcing her to take better cover. The hunt was entering its final phase, and the outcome was still very much in doubt. 9 rounds left in her magazine, and Maria Rodriguez was about to face the most intense 15 minutes of her military career. The disabled truck had forced the other 2 vehicles to stop. But the fighters were now dismounting and spreading out across the desert floor. She counted at least 25 fresh enemies joining the fight, bringing the total number of hostiles to over 35. The return fire was becoming more accurate as the enemy fighters triangulated her position based on her last few shots. Bullets were now striking within meters of her hiding spot, sending rock fragments flying through the air. One piece of shrapnel had already opened a cut on her cheek, but Maria ignored the blood trickling down her face. Alpha Team, status report. How close are you to the extraction point? We're about halfway through the passage, but we've got problems. There's another group of fighters coming up from the south. Looks like they were already in the area when the shooting started. Maria shifted her position to get a view of the southern approach and immediately saw what Sullivan was talking about. At least 8 more fighters were moving through the rocks, trying to cut off the SEAL team's escape route. The situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. I see them, Alpha Team. I'll try to slow them down, but I'm getting low on ammunition. The southern group was moving tactically, using cover and advancing in bounds, while others provided covering fire. These weren't random Taliban fighters. They moved like trained soldiers who understood small unit tactics. Maria realized they were probably facing foreign fighters, possibly Chechen or Pakistani militants who had come to Afghanistan to fight the Americans. She selected the apparent leader of the southern group, a tall man with a distinctive white headband, who was directing the others' movements. The shot was complicated by the target's movement and the wind that had picked up as the sun began to set. Maria compensated for both factors and squeezed the trigger. The fighter spun and fell, but his death seemed to motivate the others rather than demoralize them. They immediately began moving faster, abandoning some of their caution in favor of speed. Maria had eliminated their leader, but she had also made them more desperate and unpredictable. 8 rounds remaining. The enemy fighters from the disabled vehicles had spread out across the desert and were now advancing on her position from multiple directions. She was about to become the hunted instead of the hunter. Overwatch, this is Alpha Team. We can see the extraction point, but there are at least 6 hostiles between us and the landing zone. Can you clear them out? Maria looked through her scope toward the extraction point, a flat area of desert where their helicopter was supposed to pick them up. 6 enemy fighters had indeed reached the LZ first and were setting up defensive positions. If the SEALs couldn't reach the landing zone, the helicopter wouldn't be able to extract them. I can engage the LZ hostiles, but I need you to move fast. Once I start shooting at them, every enemy in the area is going to know exactly where I am. Understood. We'll be ready to move on your signal. Maria studied the 6 fighters at the extraction point. They were spread out across the landing zone in well-chosen positions that would allow them to catch the SEALs in a crossfire. She would need to eliminate at least 4 of them to give her team a fighting chance. She started with the 2 fighters who had positioned themselves on opposite sides of the LZ. They would be able to create the most effective crossfire, so they had to be eliminated first. The range was about 600 meters. Well within her capabilities despite the challenging conditions. The first shot took down the fighter on the eastern side of the LZ. The second fighter, on the western side, immediately began looking for cover when he heard his comrade fall. But Maria was already tracking him, and her second shot found him before he could reach safety. 6 rounds left. The remaining 4 fighters at the LZ were now alert and taking cover, but they weren't sure where the shots were coming from. Maria could hear vehicle engines getting closer. The 2 remaining trucks had gotten moving again and would reach her position within minutes. She continued working on the LZ defenders, picking them off with methodical precision. A third fighter tried to reposition to better cover and exposed himself for just a moment. Maria's shot was perfect, dropping him in the open ground between rocks. A fourth fighter made the mistake of returning fire in the wrong direction, giving away his position. Maria silenced him permanently. 4 rounds remaining, and only 2 enemy fighters left at the extraction point. But the real threat was now the combined force of over 30 fighters who were converging on Maria's position from all directions. Alpha Team, the LZ is mostly clear. 2 hostiles remaining, but you should be able to handle them. I suggest you move now before the main force reaches my position. We're moving, Overwatch. What's your extraction plan? That was the question Maria had been avoiding. She was surrounded by enemy fighters, with only 4 rounds left in her rifle. Her secondary weapon was a pistol with 2 magazines, but that wouldn't be much use against 30-plus hostiles. The truth was, she didn't have an extraction plan. Don't worry about me, Alpha Team. Just get to that LZ and get out of here. Negative. Overwatch. We don't leave people behind. Maria smiled despite her desperate situation. That response was exactly what she had expected from these men. They would try to save her even if it meant risking their own lives. But she couldn't let them do that. The mission was more important than any one person. Even her. Alpha Team, that's an order. Get to the extraction point and call for the bird. I'll find my own way out. She could hear Sullivan arguing on the radio, but Maria had already switched to a different frequency to call for the helicopter directly. The extraction bird was a Special Operations MH-60 Black Hawk, with 2 door gunners and enough firepower to even the odds significantly. Night Stalker 27. This is Overwatch. Alpha Team is approaching the LZ now. Be advised. Multiple hostiles in the area, and 1 friendly sniper still in contact with enemy forces. Copy. Overwatch. We're inbound. ETA 3 minutes. Can you mark your position? Maria looked at her remaining equipment. She had 1 smoke grenade and 1 fragmentation grenade left, along with her 4 remaining rifle rounds. The smoke grenade would mark her position for the helicopter, but it would also mark it for every enemy fighter in the area. The sound of approaching vehicles was getting louder. Maria estimated that the first truck would reach the base of her rocky outcrop within 2 minutes. She had to make her final stand now, with the ammunition she had left. She popped the smoke grenade and threw it about 20 meters from her position. Far enough away that it wouldn't obscure her vision, but close enough to mark her general location for the helicopter. The red smoke billowed up into the darkening sky like a beacon. The first enemy fighters appeared at the base of her position, climbing up through the rocks with AK-47 seconds ready. Maria's rifle spoke twice in quick succession, dropping the first 2 climbers before they could reach cover. 2 rounds left. More fighters were approaching from the other side of the outcrop. Maria could hear them calling to each other in Arabic and Pashto as they coordinated their assault. They knew they had her trapped, and they were taking their time to make sure she couldn't escape. The distinctive sound of helicopter rotors was beginning to echo off the canyon walls. Night Stalker 27 was approaching, but Maria wasn't sure she could hold out long enough for them to reach her position. A fighter appeared at the edge of her rocky shelter, rifle aimed directly at her. Maria's penultimate round took him center mass, but she could hear at least 3 more climbers approaching from behind her. 1 round left, and nowhere to run. She drew her sidearm and prepared for the final confrontation. The odds were impossible, but Maria Rodriguez had never been one to give up easily. If she was going down, she was going to take as many enemies with her as possible. Then the night sky erupted with the thunder of helicopter-mounted machine guns. Night Stalker 27 had arrived, and the door gunners were laying down devastating fire on the enemy positions. The climbers who had been approaching Maria's position were caught in the open and cut down before they could reach cover. The helicopter's spotlight illuminated the entire area, turning the approaching fighters into easy targets for the aerial gunners. Maria watched through her scope as enemy fighters scattered in all directions, abandoning their assault in favor of survival. Overwatch. This is Night Stalker 27. We have you marked by the red smoke. Are you ready for extraction? Maria looked down at the chaos below. Enemy fighters were fleeing toward their vehicles, or diving behind rocks to avoid the helicopter's devastating fire. The immediate threat to her position had evaporated under the onslaught from above. Night Stalker 27. I'm ready for pickup. But be advised, Alpha Team should be at the primary LZ by now. Copy that, Overwatch. Alpha Team is already on board. We're coming to get you now. The helicopter swung around to hover near Maria's position, while the door gunners continued to suppress any enemy fighters brave enough to show themselves. A fast rope dropped from the aircraft, and Maria quickly secured her rifle before rappelling down to the waiting crew. As the helicopter lifted off and turned toward friendly territory, Maria looked back at the battlefield below. Bodies were scattered across the ridges and desert floor, silent testimony to the deadly accuracy of her rifle. She had gone into the fight facing impossible odds, but she had accomplished her mission and brought her team home alive. The official after-action report would record that Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez had eliminated 31 enemy fighters during a 4-hour engagement, protecting a 6-man SEAL team against overwhelming odds, but the numbers didn't capture the whole story. They didn't describe the split-second decisions, the perfect shots under impossible conditions, or the courage required to face down an entire enemy force with nothing but a rifle and an unshakable determination to protect her brothers in arms. As the helicopter flew through the Afghan night toward safety, Maria finally allowed herself to relax. She had used 39 of her 40 rounds, and every single shot had counted. In the end, that was all any soldier could ask for. The chance to make every shot count when it mattered most. The war would continue, and there would be other missions, other impossible situations to face. But on this day, in this canyon, one female sniper had proven that sometimes the most unlikely hero can change the entire outcome of a battle. The enemy had thought they had the SEALs trapped, but they hadn't counted on Maria Rodriguez and her deadly accurate rifle. The mission was over, but the legend was just beginning.